Hello.
I never thought I'd be one of those people pouring their heart out on the internet, but here I am. My name's Jason, and until a few months ago, I thought I was living the dream with my wife, Sabrina. We've been married for almost 6 years, and until recently, I'd have sworn we had one of those fairy tale marriages everyone dreams of. We met at a bookstore. Classic, right? I had my nose buried in some history book, and she literally bumped into me reaching for something on the same shelf. Sparks flew. We dated for a couple of years, and before I knew it, we were saying I do. Our life together felt perfect. We traveled, shared hobbies, and spent lazy Sundays cooking breakfast together. I never imagined she'd betray me like she did. But then, things started to shift. At first, it was little stuff. She'd go out for coffee with friends and come back acting off. Like distracted, but weirdly affectionate too, almost overcompensating. I brushed it off as work stress or just a rough patch. We all have those, right? Then, she started taking her phone everywhere. She used to leave it on the counter without a care, but now it was glued to her hand. Bathroom? Took it with her. Middle of the night? Kept it on silent, but face down. When I'd casually ask who she was texting, she'd laugh it off, saying, "Just the girls." That's when my gut started screaming at me, but I ignored it. I wanted to believe in her, in us. One night, she left her phone unlocked on the counter while she was in the shower. I'll admit, curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't proud of snooping, but something felt off. There were messages from a contact named D. She'd mentioned of Danny once or twice, one of her girlfriends from work, she said, but the tone of these texts wasn't friendly. They were flirty, with mentions of a getaway and finally being alone together. My heart sank. I didn't have the full picture yet, but something was seriously wrong. I decided not to confront her right away. Instead, I screenshotted the texts and sent them to my email. If she was lying, I needed more proof. Over the next few weeks, Sabrina's behavior got stranger. She told me she was planning a weekend trip with her girlfriends. She even showed me a group chat as proof. But when I scrolled up, she hadn't noticed. There was no mention of a trip, just random memes and work complaints. I played dumb, but I started digging. And guess what I found? A travel itinerary for 2. Cabo. Next weekend. Under the booking details, Davis K. I was devastated. But if Sabrina thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to learn otherwise. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece everything together. It all fit, the secretive texts, the sudden distance, the over-the-top affection. And now, this Davis guy. My stomach churned just thinking about it. Cabo? She was planning to take a romantic getaway while lying to my face about a girl's trip? The next morning, I acted normal, though every word she said felt like a knife. She was still pretending everything was fine, humming while making coffee, giving me a kiss on the cheek before heading out for work. I wanted to scream, but I knew I had to play the long game. I took the day off and called a lawyer first thing. I didn't tell them everything yet, but I asked what steps I should take if infidelity was involved. They gave me some advice: gather evidence, protect my assets, and stay calm. Staying calm was the hardest part. Then I called a private investigator. It felt like something out of a movie, but I wasn't messing around. The guy I hired, Mike, had seen it all, and he didn't sugarcoat things. If she's stepping out on you, I'll find out. But you need to be ready for whatever I uncover. That night, Sabrina was extra sweet. She kept saying how excited she was for the girls' trip and how much she'd miss me. She even suggested we go out for dinner before she left to make up for her being gone. It made me sick, but I smiled and told her how much I loved her. By midweek, Mike sent me his first update. He'd followed Sabrina after work and snapped photos of her meeting Davis at a bar. They weren't just talking, they were holding hands, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My fists clenched as I scrolled through the images. But the kicker? Mike overheard their conversation. They were finalizing their plans for Cabo. She told him, "Jason has no clue. He thinks I'm going with the girls. I can't wait to finally be alone with you." That was it. The last shred of denial I'd been clinging to shattered. My wife, the woman I'd trusted with my life, was betraying me in the most humiliating way possible. The next step was clear: I had to confront her, but not without making sure I had everything I needed. I started transferring money into a separate account, quietly ensuring my finances were protected. Then I packed a bag, not for her trip, but for mine. Because I wasn't just going to sit at home while she ran off with Davis. No, I was going to Cabo too. The days leading up to her trip were brutal. I played the doting husband, pretending to buy every lie she told. She showed me fake messages from her friends about the trip, talking about spa days and margaritas on the beach. It was sickening how good she was at lying. Meanwhile, I worked with Mike, my private investigator, to finalize my own plans. He helped me book a last-minute ticket to Cabo, staying at a different resort so Sabrina wouldn't spot me. He also gave me a crash course in what to do if I caught her in the act, how to document everything without breaking any laws. Thursday night, the day before her trip, Sabrina and I went out for dinner like she suggested. She was glowing, smiling at me like I was the love of her life. Over steak and wine, she told me how much she'd miss me and how I should use the weekend to relax. "You work so hard, babe," she said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "Promise me you'll take it easy while I'm gone." I forced a smile. "I'll try. You just have fun with the girls, okay?" If she felt any guilt, she hid it well. She leaned in and kissed me, whispering, "I love you." The moment was so fake it made my skin crawl, but I held it together. The next morning, I watched her pack. She threw in bikinis, sundresses, and lingerie, because obviously, she needed lingerie for a girls' trip. I didn't say a word. Instead, I hugged her goodbye and watched her Uber drive off to the airport. An hour later, I was on my way to Cabo too. Landing in Cabo, I felt a mix of rage and nerves. This wasn't just about catching her, it was about confronting her lies head-on. Mike had already confirmed their resort and itinerary. They'd be staying at an all-inclusive spot with private beach cabanas, real romantic. I checked into my own resort and spent the evening going over my plan. I didn't want to just show up and start yelling. This needed to be public, undeniable, and humiliating for both of them. The next morning, Mike sent me a text. "They're on the beach now. Private cabana. Want me to get pics?" I replied, "Yes, but stay back. I'll handle the rest." My heart pounded as I made my way to their resort, pretending to be just another tourist. When I got to the beach, I spotted them immediately. Sabrina was lounging in a bikini, sipping a cocktail, while Davis leaned over her, rubbing sunscreen on her back. Seeing them together made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I got everything: the smiles, the hand-holding, the kiss she gave him when he brought her another drink. Then I walked up to them. Walking across that beach felt like an out-of-body experience. My heart was hammering, but I wasn't nervous, I was angry. Angry at her lies, at her betrayal, at how she smiled so freely next to him like I didn't exist. The world around me seemed to blur as I focused on them, my phone still recording every second. Sabrina was mid-laugh when she spotted me. Her face froze, her drink halfway to her lips. Davis turned to look too, confusion flashing across his face. "Jason." Sabrina stammered, sitting up straight. What are you doing here?" I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, letting her squirm. Her eyes darted around, probably searching for an excuse, but I wasn't giving her the chance. "Nice setup," I finally said, gesturing at the cabana, the drinks, Davis himself. "This what a girl's trip looks like these days?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Jason, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, my voice low but firm. I turned to Davis, who had the audacity to look uncomfortable. "And you must be Davis. Sabrina's friend." Davis started to say something, but I cut him off. "I'm not interested in your story, buddy. I just want you to know who you've been screwing over." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers. "These are divorce papers, Sabrina. I figured since you were already in such a romantic mood, now's the perfect time to serve them." Her face went pale. "Jason, don't do this here. Please, can we talk?" "Oh, we're talking. Right here, right now. You've lied to me for weeks, probably months, and now you're worried about being embarrassed." I could feel people around us starting to notice. Heads turned, murmurs spreading. I didn't care. If she wanted to make a fool out of me, I was making sure everyone saw the truth. "Jason, Stop," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "Don't even bother. I've seen the texts, the pictures. I followed you here because I needed to see it for myself. And now I have." Davis stood up, trying to step in. Look man, I don't think this is the place for. This has nothing to do with you, I shot back, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're just the loser she decided to sneak around with. Enjoy her while you can, Davis, because once I'm done, she's all yours. Sabrina stood too, reaching for my arm, her voice cracking. Jason, I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this. I stepped back, shaking my head. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner, Sabrina. You planned this. Lied to my face, over and over. This isn't a mistake, it's a choice. And now I'm making mine. I dropped the envelope onto the lounge chair where she'd been sitting, then turned to walk away. I could hear her calling after me, her voice frantic, but I didn't stop. My phone was still recording, capturing everything, her desperate pleas fading into the background as I left the beach. That night, I sent Davis's wife the evidence. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention he was married? Mike had dug that up for me too. I didn't even bother with a note, just forwarded the pictures and screenshots with a simple subject line. You deserve to know. I spent the rest of the night on my hotel balcony, staring out at the ocean. The rage had settled into something colder now, something final. I thought I'd feel broken, but instead, I felt free. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do: go home, finalize the divorce, and rebuild my life on my terms. Sabrina had tried to destroy me, but she underestimated me. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the start of a new one. The flight back home was eerily peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in doubt or second-guessing myself. I had the evidence, the confrontation was over, and now it was time to focus on what came next. Sabrina would be returning the same day as me, but I wasn't planning on being there when she walked in. Instead, I headed straight to my lawyer's office. He'd already started drafting the divorce papers when I first called him, and now we had everything we needed to make it airtight. Infidelity wasn't just emotional, it was financial. I'd worked hard to build up our savings, and I wasn't about to let Sabrina walk away with more than she deserved. The pictures, videos, and texts I'd gathered left no room for debate. That afternoon, I sent Sabrina a text. I've moved out for now. The divorce papers are in the works. Don't contact me unless it's through my lawyer. No more playing the nice guy. The first ripple in the fallout came that night. Davis's wife, Elena, called me. I almost didn't pick up. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Her voice was calm, but you could hear the controlled fury underneath. Jason? This is Elena, Davis's wife. I figured, I replied, leaning against the kitchen counter. I just wanted to say thank you for sending me the proof. Her tone softened slightly, but not by much. I had my suspicions, but I couldn't prove it. Until now. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, I said honestly. No one deserves this. She let out a bitter laugh. No, they don't. But I can promise you one thing. Davis isn't walking away from this unscathed. He thinks he's smooth, but he's about to learn otherwise. We didn't talk long, but it felt good knowing Davis wouldn't just slink away without consequences. Sabrina, on the other hand, was a different story. By the time she got back to the house, I was long gone. I'd moved into a friend's guest room temporarily, leaving her the space to stew in her own mess. She sent me a flurry of texts over the next couple of days, each one more desperate than the last. Jason, please, let's talk. We can fix this. I know I messed up, but we've been through so much together. Why are you ignoring me? This isn't fair. Fair? That one made me laugh. As if lying, cheating, and humiliating me was fair. When she realized I wasn't responding, her tone shifted. By the end of the week, the messages were bitter. I can't believe you'd throw everything away over a mistake. You're overreacting. It was just one trip. It was like she couldn't grasp the gravity of what she'd done. But I wasn't wasting my energy trying to explain it to her. By the end of the week, I received another surprise, a call from Sabrina's mother. Jason, I don't know what's going on, but Sabrina is a wreck. She says you left her and filed for divorce. I sighed. Did she tell you why? She said you're angry about something small and won't let it go. Of course, she twisted the story. It's not small. She cheated on me, planned an entire trip with another man, and lied about it for months. There was silence on the other end of the line. Oh, her mother finally said. I didn't know that. Well, now you do. To her credit, Sabrina's mom didn't try to defend her. I'm so sorry, Jason. I had no idea. She's been calling me in tears, but she never told me the whole truth. I don't expect you to pick sides, I said, trying to stay civil. But I'm done. I'm not going to let her spin this into something it's not. We ended the call on a neutral note, but it was clear Sabrina wasn't just losing me, she was starting to lose the sympathy of those around her. The fallout reached its peak when Sabrina showed up at my friend's place unannounced. She must have gotten the address from one of our mutual friends, but that didn't make her appearance any less jarring. Jason, please, she pleaded, standing on the porch. I just want to talk. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. What part of "go through my lawyer" didn't you understand? Her face crumpled. Why are you being so cold? We can fix this. I know I made a mistake, but we're married. That has to count for something. I crossed my arms. You want to talk about what counts? How about honesty? Loyalty? Respect? You threw all of that away the moment you got involved with Davis. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I was confused, she sobbed. I didn't know what I wanted, but now I do. I want us. It's too late, Sabrina. My voice was steady, resolute. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I'm done. Her sobs turned into anger. You're just giving up? On everything we built together? No, I said firmly. You gave up the moment you decided I wasn't enough. I turned and walked back inside, leaving her on the porch. It was over. She just hadn't accepted it yet. The first official step in the divorce came a few days later when Sabrina's lawyer contacted mine. As expected, she was trying to downplay the whole thing, painting it as a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment. She even floated the idea of couples counseling, claiming we could work through it. But there was no misunderstanding. I had the texts, the photos, and my own confrontation to prove otherwise. My lawyer didn't even blink. Jason, she's desperate, he said after the call. She knows the evidence is stacked against her. Stay firm, and don't let her manipulate you. And that's exactly what I did. The first court meeting was a wake-up call for Sabrina. My lawyer laid everything out, the proof of her infidelity, the hidden trip expenses, and even the messages with Davis that showed she was already emotionally checked out of our marriage long before Cabo. Sabrina looked pale as the judge reviewed the evidence. Her lawyer tried to argue that her actions shouldn't impact the division of assets, but my lawyer countered with the financial burden her affair had placed on our marriage. The trip to Cabo wasn't cheap, and she dipped into our shared funds to cover part of it. That alone made a strong case for protecting what I'd worked so hard to build. The judge didn't issue a final decision that day, but it was clear which way the wind was blowing. Sabrina's charm didn't stand a chance against cold, hard facts. While the legal battle dragged on, Sabrina started pulling other stunts to regain control of the narrative. She posted vague, teary updates on social media, talking about how people make mistakes and how she was trying to heal. Friends who didn't know the full story reached out, asking why I was being so harsh. It was exhausting, but I didn't bite. I let the truth speak for itself. A few mutual friends who'd been on the fence eventually came around after I shared what really happened. One even apologized for doubting me, saying, I should have known better. Sabrina always had a way of making herself look like the victim. Then came the twist I wasn't expecting: Davis. Apparently, his wife Elena wasn't just kicking him out, she was coming for everything. She'd filed for divorce the same week I did, and she wasn't holding back. Word got back to me that Davis was scrambling, trying to save his reputation and assets. One afternoon, I got an email from him. Subject: Let's talk. Body: Jason, I know you probably hate me, but I think we should have a conversation. There's a lot Sabrina hasn't told you, and you deserve to know the truth. Let me know if you're willing to meet. I stared at the email for a long time before forwarding it to my lawyer. His response was immediate: do not engage with him directly. If there's anything worth sharing, it'll come out in Elena's case. I wasn't about to give Davis the satisfaction of a response. He'd already caused enough damage, and whatever truth he thought I needed wasn't worth hearing from him. As the weeks went by, Sabrina's attempts to reconcile grew more desperate. She called, emailed, and even tried showing up at my workplace once, though security turned her away. Each time, she begged for another chance, saying she'd do whatever it took to fix things. But her actions spoke louder than her words. A week after her dramatic porch visit, Mike, my private investigator, sent me an update, she'd been spotted meeting Davis again. This time, it wasn't at a fancy bar or a resort, it was a coffee shop a few miles from his place. It was laughable. She told me she was fighting for our marriage, but she couldn't even stay away from the guy who helped destroy it. The final nail in the coffin came during mediation. Sabrina tried to argue that she deserved a larger share of our assets because she'd supported me emotionally during the early years of our marriage. My lawyer calmly pointed out that any emotional support was negated by her betrayal, and the judge didn't seem impressed by her crocodile tears. By the end of the session, it was clear Sabrina wasn't getting the payday she'd hoped for. The majority of our shared assets, including the house, were awarded to me. She was left with a much smaller settlement than she'd expected, just enough to get by, but far from the life of luxury she'd envisioned. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The legal part was over, but I knew the emotional healing would take longer. Still, for the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. Sabrina was no longer my responsibility. The first few days after the divorce was finalized felt strange. I'd spent months consumed by the betrayal, the legal battle, and the whirlwind of emotions that came with it. Now, there was silence. No more emails from lawyers, no more late-night texts from Sabrina. Just me, standing in the rubble of what used to be my life, trying to figure out what came next. I moved back into the house, the one Sabrina had fought so hard to keep but ultimately lost. At first, it felt hollow, like I was walking through someone else's life. The walls still had photos of us, wedding pictures, vacation shots, happy memories that now felt like a cruel joke. I took them all down the first night, boxing them up and shoving them into the attic. The next morning, I started fresh. Work became another anchor for me. I'd taken some time off during the divorce to deal with everything, but now I was back and throwing myself into it. My coworkers noticed the change. They said I seemed more focused, more driven. What they didn't know was that work was my way of drowning out the noise in my head. One day, my boss called me into his office. "Jason, I've been watching how you've handled things these past few months," he said. "I know you've had some personal struggles, but you've come out stronger. I think it's time we talk about moving you up." A promotion wasn't something I'd even considered, but hearing those words lit a fire in me. For so long, my life had revolved around Sabrina. Now it was about me, and I wasn't going to waste that chance. Then there was Davis. Elena's divorce case against him was brutal. She didn't just take him to court, she took him apart. Mike, my private investigator, shared updates occasionally, and it was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Davis lost almost everything: his house, most of his savings, and his reputation. Elena wasn't just fighting for herself, she made sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man he was. By the end of it, Davis was living in a tiny apartment and scrambling to rebuild his life. But the final blow came when his boss found out about the affair. Davis had been working for a high-profile firm, the kind of place that values image above all else. When word got out about his affair and the messy divorce, they let him go. Seeing his downfall didn't fix everything for me, but it was satisfying in a way. Karma had done its job. As for Sabrina, I heard bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. She'd moved into a smaller apartment across town and was working at the same job, though she wasn't the life of the office anymore. One friend told me she'd tried dating again but wasn't having much luck. "She's a mess," the friend said. "I think she finally realizes what she lost." Good. She needed to feel that. But the best part of rebuilding my life wasn't about her, or Davis, or the past. It was about moving forward. I started taking better care of myself, hitting the gym, eating healthier, and even picking up a new hobby, photography. It was something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. Now, I made the time. One weekend, I went on a solo road trip, just me and my camera. I drove through the countryside, stopping whenever something caught my eye: a field of wildflowers, an old barn, a winding river. By the end of the trip, I felt more like myself than I had in years. It wasn't about forgetting Sabrina or erasing the pain. It was about rediscovering who I was without her. It had been a little over 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was starting to feel okay. Not great, not perfect, but okay. The house was mine, my career was on the rise, and I was finally settling into a routine that felt like it was mine and mine alone. Then one Saturday morning, my life took another turn, this time for the better. I'd been visiting a local coffee shop every weekend, bringing my laptop to do some work or just people watch while sipping my usual black coffee. It became my little ritual, a way to enjoy my newfound independence. That morning, as I was typing away, I heard someone say, "Mind if I share your table?" Looking up, I saw a woman with warm brown eyes and a slightly sheepish smile, holding a cup of tea in one hand and a book in the other. The shop was crowded, and my table was the only one with an empty chair. "Sure," I said, gesturing for her to sit. She introduced herself as Emma, a writer working on a project about small-town life. We started chatting, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. Emma had this way of making conversation feel effortless, like we'd known each other for years. She was sharp, funny, and genuinely curious about the world around her. When she asked about me, I hesitated at first. My story wasn't exactly cheerful, but something about her made me feel like I could be honest. "I'm recently divorced," I admitted. It was messy. Still figuring out what's next. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's rough. But it sounds like you're handling it well, better than most people would." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't used to being seen like that, like I was more than the guy who got cheated on. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I kept running into each other at the coffee shop. Sometimes it was planned, sometimes not, but every time, the conversations flowed easily. She told me about her book, her love of photography, which sparked a connection since I just picked it up, and her dream of traveling the world. One afternoon, as we were walking out of the shop, she stopped and turned to me. "You know," she said, "you should come to the farmers market this weekend. There's a lot of great photography opportunities there." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because it felt like a step into uncharted territory. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, all the risks I'd taken to rebuild my life, and I realized this was no different. "I'll be there," I said. The market was bustling with activity when I arrived. Emma was waiting by a stall that sold fresh flowers, her camera slung around her neck. She greeted me with a smile that felt warmer than the sun overhead, and we spent the next couple of hours wandering through the stalls, snapping pictures of everything from handmade pottery to colorful produce. At one point, she turned her camera toward me and snapped a candid shot. "What was that for?" I asked, laughing. "Just capturing the moment," she said, grinning. I didn't realize how much I'd missed moments like this, simple, unforced, and full of possibility. As weeks turned into months, Emma and I grew closer. We didn't rush into anything, which was a relief for both of us. She'd been through her own share of heartbreak, a long-term relationship that ended because her partner didn't share her dreams. We bonded over that shared understanding of loss and the determination to move forward. With Emma, there was no pressure to be perfect, no need to explain myself constantly. She saw me for who I was now, not just the guy recovering from a failed marriage. One night, as we sat on my back porch looking up at the stars, Emma turned to me and said, "Jason, do you ever feel like everything that happened to you, no matter how painful, was leading you here?" I thought about her question for a long moment, then nodded. "I didn't back then," I said. "But now? Yeah, I think I do." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Me too." Meeting Emma didn't erase the pain of the past, but it showed me that life doesn't stop after heartbreak. It evolves, expands, and sometimes brings people into your life who make it all worth it. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Emma and I continued to build something that felt real, solid, and ours. It wasn't rushed or forced, it just unfolded naturally. She brought a kind of calm into my life I hadn't realized I needed, and I started to feel like I could finally breathe again. But life doesn't let you fully escape the past, and mine came knocking sooner than I expected. One afternoon, while Emma and I were at a park taking photos, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Jason, it's Sabrina. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please. It's important." I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. Emma noticed my hesitation. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at my phone. "It's Sabrina," I admitted. "She says she needs to talk to me about something important." Emma's expression didn't change, which was one of the things I loved about her. She didn't jump to conclusions or overreact. "Do you think you'll respond?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's probably another attempt to reel me back in. If it were me, I'd want closure," she said softly. "But only if it's for you, not for her." I nodded, appreciating her perspective. After a few minutes of thought, I decided to reply. "What do you need, Sabrina?" Her response came quickly. "Can we meet in person? Just once. I won't ask for anything more, I promise." I agreed, but on my terms. We met at a neutral spot, a quiet diner on the edge of town. When I arrived, Sabrina was already there, sitting at a corner booth and looking far removed from the confident woman I used to know. She fidgeted with her coffee cup as I sat down. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice quieter than I expected. "What's this about, Sabrina?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Jason, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the excuses I gave you before." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "I'm listening." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the same pang of sympathy I might have once. "I messed up so badly," she said, her voice cracking. "I took you for granted. I thought I could have it all. You were always there, steady and loyal, and I thought that meant I could get away with anything." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. "I hurt you in ways I can't even fully understand," she continued. "And I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say it out loud, to own what I did." For a moment, I just looked at her, trying to process the person sitting across from me. She wasn't the Sabrina who had lied to my face or humiliated me in Cabo. She looked lost, like someone who'd finally seen the damage they'd caused. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "But I'm not sure what you're expecting from me. I've moved on, Sabrina. I'm in a better place now. I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly, wiping her eyes. I needed to let you know that I see it now. How good you were to me. How much I threw away. And I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me, not for me but for you." Her words surprised me. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't trying to manipulate me or fix things for her benefit. She was just trying to own up to the wreckage she'd caused. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "But I appreciate the apology. It means something." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. That's all I needed to say. After leaving the diner, I felt lighter. Not because I forgave Sabrina, but because I no longer felt like I had unfinished business with her. When I got back home, Emma was waiting on the porch with her camera, smiling as I walked up. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Better than I thought it would," I admitted, sitting next to her. "It's like the chapter's finally closed." She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Good," she said simply. Over the next few weeks, life fell back into its new rhythm. Emma and I planned small adventures, a weekend hiking trip, a gallery exhibit for her book research, even a cooking class that ended with us burning half the meal but laughing the whole time. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, building a life that felt meaningful and whole again. As for Sabrina, I heard through mutual friends that she started going to therapy and was trying to rebuild her own life. Davis, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. His ex-wife Elena had taken everything she could in the divorce, and last I heard, he'd moved out of town, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and burned bridges. It wasn't my problem anymore, and I was glad for that. One evening, as Emma and I sat on the couch flipping through the photos we'd taken that day, she leaned her head against my shoulder. "Jason," she said softly. "Yeah. I'm glad you didn't give up. On life, I mean. On trusting people again." I kissed the top of her head, feeling a warmth I hadn't known in a long time. "Me too," I said. "Because life goes on. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it gets even better." With Sabrina and Davis firmly in the rearview mirror, my focus shifted entirely to the life I was creating with Emma. It wasn't something I'd planned, but every step felt right. Emma wasn't just someone I cared about. She was a partner who made me see life in a new light. But even with everything going well, there were moments when doubt crept in. Could I really build something lasting after all the betrayal and heartbreak? Was I ready to trust fully again? Emma, in her quiet and steady way, had a way of easing those fears without even realizing it. One day, about 8 months after we first met, we went on a day trip to a small town known for its historic architecture and sprawling vineyards. It was the kind of place you could wander for hours, exploring hidden alleyways and snapping photos of old buildings bathed in golden light. As we strolled through the town square, Emma spotted a small bookstore with an old-fashioned sign hanging above the door. "Let's go in," she said, tugging my arm. The shop was tiny but packed floor to ceiling with books, the scent of aged paper filling the air. Emma wandered off to the fiction section, while I found myself drawn to the photography books. I flipped through a few before my eyes landed on one that immediately caught my attention. It was a guide to capturing candid moments, raw, unposed, and full of emotion. When I brought it to the counter, the elderly shopkeeper glanced at the book and then at me. "You a photographer?" she asked with a warm smile. "Not really," I admitted. "Just a hobby." "Hobbies have a way of turning into passions," she said, ringing up the book. I carried her words with me as Emma and I left the shop, my new book tucked under my arm. That evening, we stopped at a vineyard for a late lunch, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the rows of grapevines. As we sipped wine and shared stories, Emma pulled out her camera and started snapping pictures of the view, and me. "What are you doing?" I asked, laughing as she snapped another shot of me mid-sip. "Capturing the moment," she said, echoing the words she'd spoken at the farmer's market months ago. I reached for her camera, flipping it around to take a photo of her. "Your turn," I said, grinning. She laughed, but the smile she gave me was genuine, soft, and full of something I couldn't quite put into words. I took the shot, and when I looked at it later, I knew it was one of the best photos I'd ever taken, not because of the composition, but because of the feeling behind it. Over time, photography became more than just a hobby for me. With Emma's encouragement, I started sharing my work online, joining local photography groups, and even entering a few contests. It gave me a sense of purpose outside of work and relationships, a way to express myself and create something meaningful. Emma, meanwhile, was finishing her book, and I was her biggest cheerleader. Watching her pour her heart and soul into her writing inspired me to keep pushing myself too. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a quiet evening at home. Emma and I had just finished dinner, and we were sitting on the couch, flipping through photos I'd taken on one of our trips. She paused on a picture of the two of us, taken by a stranger we'd handed the camera to during a hike. We were standing on a cliffside, the ocean behind us, laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice soft. "All the time," I replied, setting the photo book aside. "Why?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Because I think about it too. And I see you in mine." Her words hit me like a wave, not in a bad way, but in a way that made my heart feel like it was expanding. "I see you in mine too," I said, without hesitation. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words settling between us. Then I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. "Emma," I said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing: I don't want to face it without you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Then let's face it together." That night marked the beginning of something even deeper. We started talking about the bigger picture, what we wanted, where we saw ourselves in 5, 10, 20 years. It wasn't about rushing into anything, it was about making sure we were building something that could last. And for the first time since my marriage fell apart, I believed it could. Emma and I settled into this rhythm of building a life together. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was simple, and that's what made it perfect. A few weeks after that conversation about the future, we were walking through the park, cameras slung over our shoulders. It was one of those golden autumn afternoons, with leaves crunching underfoot and the air crisp enough to make you feel alive. We stopped at a bench overlooking the lake, and Emma pulled out her camera to snap a few pictures of the water. I watched her, thinking about everything we'd been through in such a short time, how she'd walked into my life when I wasn't sure I could trust anyone again. Without really planning it, I said, "Emma, I want us to move in together." She turned, her eyes wide with surprise. "Are you serious?" "Completely," I said. "I know it's sooner than we probably expected, but I'm sure about this." "About you." Her face broke into a smile that lit up the entire park. "Then let's do it." The move was seamless, as if it had been meant to happen all along. My house transformed into our home, with little touches of Emma everywhere, her books, her artwork, her laughter filling the rooms. It wasn't the life I'd imagined years ago, but it was better. Moving in together felt like the final piece of a puzzle I didn't realize I was putting together. The house, once filled with memories I wanted to forget, became a fresh canvas. Emma brought light into every corner, not just with her decorations but with her presence. She turned the spare room into a cozy library, her books lining the walls. My camera gear found a home there too, along with a small desk where we'd sit side by side, her writing and me editing photos. Even the kitchen, a space I'd barely used before, became a hub of laughter and experiments as we tried out new recipes together. One night, as we stood side by side washing dishes, she glanced at me and said, "Do you realize how far you've come?" I paused, looking at her. "What do you mean?" "You've rebuilt everything," she said softly. "Your life, your trust, your happiness. You should be proud of yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected, but in a good way. She was right, I'd come a long way. And for the first time, I let myself feel proud of that. Things weren't perfect, of course. No relationship is. We had our disagreements, about little things like what color to paint the living room or who forgot to take the trash out. But the difference was how we handled them. With Emma, everything felt like teamwork. One weekend, as we were tidying up the house, she stumbled across an old box of photos I'd packed away after the divorce. Sabrina was in some of them, but Emma didn't make a big deal about it. "These are part of your story," she said, holding up one where I looked ridiculously young. "But they don't define you." Her words stuck with me. That evening, I went through the box alone, tossing the ones I didn't want to keep and holding on to the ones that mattered. Photos of trips and moments that reminded me of who I was, not who I'd lost. Our life together was simple, but it was ours. We weren't rushing toward any big milestones. We were just happy. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly home. As the months rolled by, Emma and I settled into a life that felt peaceful and full. It wasn't flashy or overly eventful, it was steady, built on the kind of trust and companionship I never thought I'd find again. One crisp morning in late spring, as we were having coffee on the back porch, Emma looked up from her notebook with a thoughtful expression. "Jason, have you ever thought about teaching photography?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "Teaching? Like a class?" "Yeah," she said, smiling. "You're so passionate about it, and you're really good at explaining things. I bet people would love to learn from you." The idea stuck with me. Later that day, I reached out to the local community center to ask about offering a beginner photography course. Within weeks, I was standing in front of a small group of eager students, teaching them the basics of composition and lighting. Watching them light up as they captured their first great shots reminded me of why I fell in love with photography in the first place. It wasn't just about taking pictures, it was about seeing the world in a new way. Emma came to the first class, sitting quietly in the back with her camera. Afterward, she walked up and hugged me. "You're a natural," she said, beaming. The photography class became a regular thing, and with Emma's encouragement, I even started taking on small freelance projects, family portraits, local events, and even a wedding or two. For the first time, I wasn't just doing photography as a hobby, I was making it part of my life in a real way. And Emma? She finished her book, a beautiful collection of essays and photographs that captured the essence of small-town life. When she handed me the first printed copy, I couldn't stop grinning. "This is amazing," I said, flipping through the pages. She smiled softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." One evening after dinner, we were sitting on the couch when Emma turned to me, her expression serious but warm. "Jason," she began, "what do you think about the idea of us starting a family someday?" Her words caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. "I've thought about it," I admitted. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready for that again. "But with you? I can see it." Her smile lit up the room. "Good. Because I can too." We weren't in a rush, but just having that conversation felt monumental. It was a reminder that life wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building something better from where you were. And with Emma, I knew we were doing just that. Life with Emma became a series of quiet joys and shared dreams. We didn't rush into anything, but we started taking small steps toward the life we'd imagined during our late-night talks. The photography classes grew into a passion project for me, and Emma's book gained traction, earning her invites to speak at local events. Watching her stand in front of a crowd, sharing her words and inspiring others, made me proud in a way I couldn't put into words. One sunny afternoon, we were walking through the park, cameras in hand, when Emma stopped suddenly and turned to me. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but steady. "What if we got a dog? You know, to prepare for something bigger later." I laughed, but the idea stuck. 2 weeks later, we brought home a scrappy little rescue mutt named Max, who immediately became the center of our world. Max was chaos and comfort rolled into one, waking us up early for walks but also curling up beside us during quiet evenings. He wasn't just a dog, he was a symbol of the future we were building, one small step at a time. Max brought chaos and joy into our lives, but most of all, he made us feel like a family. One evening, during a trip to the mountains, I brought Emma to a spot we'd visited early in our relationship, a quiet overlook with a breathtaking view. As she took a photo, I pulled out a small velvet box. "Emma," I said, and she turned, her eyes widening. "You've shown me what it means to rebuild and trust again. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, throwing her arms around me. "Yes, Jason. Yes." With Max wagging his tail beside us, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. This was it, the life I'd fought for, with the person who made it all worth it. And just like that, my story came full circle.
Bye.